In the financial independence, retire early, and frugal living communities, it is often said that people's three biggest categories of spending are well known: housing, transportation, food. Let's remember the three letters representing those three categories: H for housing, T for transportation, and F for food. Later in the video, we'll build a mnemonic out of that. I wondered if this idea that these are the three biggest expense categories is just folklore, or if there are data behind it. Here's a chart from a report by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. I think it puts the question to rest for Americans, and I have no reason to think that we'd see substantially different results in other developed countries. The top three categories of spending in American households are clearly housing, transportation, and food. Some of my favorite fire bloggers post their annual expenses, so I went to a few of these websites to see how they're handling housing, transportation, and food expenses. It's not easy to make quantitative comparisons across different bloggers, and I won't try to do that here, but let me explain with an example why such comparisons are difficult. One person might categorize their home insurance as an insurance expense, and another might categorize their home insurance as a housing expense. There are dozens of decisions and assumptions that are baked into a spending report, so these reports usually can't be compared easily. Anyway, suffice it to say that some of my favorite bloggers would be not at all surprised by what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting. Over at travelingwallet.com, for example, I found that nearly 38% of the family's 2015 budget went to housing, 13% went to automotive expenses, and 9% went to food. So nearly 60% of their spending was in the top three categories. Over at rootofgood.com, where I always marvel at the family's very low spending, it's evident that they benefit tremendously from having a paid-off house, driving their vehicle rarely, and bargain hunting for groceries. At nomadnumbers.com, you can see how a nomadic couple keeps their Airbnb, transportation, and food expenses so low that they actually save money through slow travel compared to living in an average cost of living area in the United States. In short, the secret is out, and people who figure out how to lower some combination of their housing, transportation, and food expenses can save huge amounts of money. The H, T, and F categories are good categories to focus on if you need to reduce your expenses. But as we momentarily focus on U.S. data, let me draw your attention to the fourth and fifth most expensive categories according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Personal insurance and health care are what come in fourth and fifth place. Subscribers to this channel may remember that I've done videos about exploring health insurance plans on the healthcare.gov website. Those videos reminded us that Americans who don't have health insurance through an employer, like early retirees, face some huge costs. Here's a reminder of one of the data tables from the prior video. You may want to pause the video here and take note of the assumptions that are up above the table and the figures that appear in it. But if you get nothing else out of this table, just look at those big annual expenses in the rightmost column. So I have a proposal, especially for those who live in the U.S. Instead of talking about the big three in household expenses, I suggest we talk about the big four. And I'd like to propose a simple mnemonic to remember them. Let's call what we're learning about right now the 2 hot feet rule. Here's what the mnemonic comes from. The H at the beginning of hot is for housing. The T at the end of hot is for transportation. The F is for food. And the 2 reminds us that there's another H, health insurance. For Americans, the second H really does belong next to housing. For some Americans, health insurance costs at least as much as their housing, if not more. Plenty of early retirees are spending more on health insurance than they're spending on transportation or food. One nice thing about the 2 hot feet rule is that it doesn't just remind us of the big four expenses. It also reminds us of one of the most powerful techniques for reducing the big four expenses. If your feet are too hot, move. Thousands of early retirees have been able to substantially lower their living expenses by moving. This is one of the reasons that so many videos on the Multicollinearity channel are about geographic arbitrage. Geoarbitrage is adaptable to circumstances and preferences. Consider that over 1 million Americans and Canadians live in Mexico alone. But if living in Mexico, Portugal, Thailand, Spain, Ecuador, etc. doesn't work for you, you still have thousands of domestic options worth considering. You may be pleasantly surprised at how cheaply you can live in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. If that surprised you, take a look at Truth or Consequences. You could take a look at Springfield, Missouri. You could take a look at Sherbrooke, Quebec. I have to admit I had to do some Googling to find a Canadian example, but as I learned about Sherbrooke, now I feel like I really need to go visit. Anyway, that's the 2 hot feet rule, which reminds us of the 4 largest expenses for many people. It also reminds us of a powerful way to reduce some or all of those expenses. What do you think of the 2 hot feet rule, or of geographic arbitrage as a way to reduce the big 3 or big 4 expenses? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.